Okay, we're gonna get started. So if you can grab a chair. I mean, there's plenty of empty chairs, so. We're starting, folks. Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome to the RFC ++both. We have 1 hour and a half, and we have, I mean, you've probably seen a lot of discussions on the list, so we're going to try to be efficient, and, there's not enough time, so let's get going. This is the Notewell. You should be familiar with that, and if you are not, you should go and read it. So, we have a JavaScript, so thank you, Peter. Just please, relay any requests on the Java room and monitor it otherwise. Thanks a lot. Minute taker, so we need a volunteer. Who can be the minute taker? Yeah. Do we need to pick somebody? Minute taker? So if we don't have a volunteer in 5 seconds, we will pick one. Okay, Andrew, thank you so much. So Andrew will be taking minutes and Peter scribing. And please sign the blue sheets. They should be there. And, when they go back, they basically, just let us know and we will try to do the right button here. And please state your name clearly and concisely in the mic. And let's keep this professional, right? I mean, we know this kind of, triggers a lot of emotional responses in people, but we want to keep the bot professionally and try to do something useful. So you know what that means. Agenda, we've been discussing the agenda on the general list and the IETF list. So you probably saw the emails. We chose to do kind of a very simple agenda, trying to explore basically the problem space. So this is what we put together. We had a few requests for presentations, but we thought it was better basically to give from the chair basically a very high level introduction and get the discussion going, as opposed to spend the time with presentations. Since we only have 1 hour and a half. So this is the agenda that was posted, and Sean.
So before we get to that, let's just start off with a little bit of humor and keep it a little bit light. We love red herrings. We think that they're really great. They're very tasty. We also love bike sheds. This is probably my favorite picture. Sorry? Oh, sorry. So we love red herrings. They're very tasty. We also love bike sheds. This is the IETF. But really what we're here for is for pretty much all of the streams, right? The IETF, the ISE, the IB, and the IRTF, the whole community.
Okay, so we got this slide just to present, I mean, for basically to get, everyone at the same level of understanding, what we can do with each stream. And we have been having a conversation, again, on the general list, as opposed to the both, RFC++ list. And, Brian and I think Scott were pointing out that maybe some of the data that, that is in the RFC editor's database is actually wrong. We talked to some other people that said maybe it's not actually wrong. And so, I talked to Robert, and he's going to actually go one by one on the RFCs to actually check if they are actual independent stream submissions and they are either proposed standard and BCP or they are not. But at this point, I think it's enough to know that, basically this is what the database says, and the database may be containing, wrong information or not. But the point is, like, this slide is supposed to show what has been done traditionally. And the next slide, yeah. This one. This is what is actually allowed. So you can see that basically draft standard, it was removed some time ago. And then, the IETF stream can basically publish, everything. The IAB stream, they wouldn't do standard strat. The IRTF, only the 3 last ones. And the same for the independent stream. I actually agree with Brian that he was making the point that maybe, the slides were not clear. So here, on the bottom left, instead of publish RFC, probably we could say, like, historically this has been done. So I agree this could have been a bit clearer, but that's what we are trying to show, basically, what is allowed and what has been done in the future, in the past, sorry. And basically, I mean, just to be clear, like there's been some discussions on the list about, killing streams or doing things like that. So just to be clear, I mean, we are not talking about killing anything here. The discussion has been about relabeling, using different labels, calling the output something different. So, nobody's discussing, killing any stream, just to be clear.
Okay, again, so for some more historic content, what's actually been, the RFCs have been published. You can see through the different streams and the actual numbers there. So like 5,800 basically through the IETF stream, about 2,000 of them are also legacy, and there's IRTF and IEC streams. You can see the number and the percentage of the streams. Since there's so many legacy, it kind of skews the numbers a little bit. So what we ended up doing was following what PSA sent. Peterson Andre, sorry, to the list was actually cutting out the legacy ones to see which ones have been published more recently. And you can see that the vast majority, 92% of the IETF stream, the IEC, I think it's like 5%, 1% is the IRTF, and 2% is the IEB stream. And finally, this is the RFCs, which is the RFC stream editor stuff, and the percentage and which ones they are, whether they're proposed standards, obviously is the biggest kind of bucket. And then the other one is informational, obviously, and they fall down in percentages based on that. And again, it's the number and then the percentage. So, on to the questions.
Okay. So, as I said on the list, we've been talking to a lot of you, basically, with different opinions, different takes on what would be a useful outcome, and trying to get kind of, the idea is to make this both as useful as possible, right? So in that sense, we thought that discussing a particular solution or proposal wouldn't be actually a good use of our time, because people don't seem to agree on whether there's a problem and whether the problem is worth solving. So we are actually backing up, and instead of discussing a concrete proposal, we are trying to explore the problem space as opposed to the solution space. So we have a set of questions here, 3 in particular, to just try to understand what people think about this. What is the issue, whether there's an issue, and whether we actually want to solve it. As I said also on the list, we would have liked to have much more concrete questions, but we don't think at this point we could have more concrete questions just without basically, let's say, loading the dice and, trying to, go in one direction or the other. And here from the chair, we are trying to be as neutral as possible, just trying to facilitate discussions. So I understand that people, could be frustrated and they want really concrete questions and investigate their favorite proposal, but we just honestly don't think that would be useful, okay? So having said that, the questions we prepared, which, we would like to, people going to the mic to try to address them, and then depending on how the vote goes, we may take a hand at the end or not. We will play by the ear and take it from there. So the first one is obviously, is there one or more issues? People have been talking about different issues. There doesn't seem to be an agreement on what the exact issue is, or if there are several ones. So, there's confusion, there's no confusion, so we would like to hear about that. The next one is, assuming there's an issue or several issues, or people, have perceived issues, are there worth fixing? We have heard also some people that thought, sure, there's an issue, but we don't think it's worth fixing, right? So that's also worthwhile knowing, and we would like people, when they speak about, whether there's issues, to also address this. And finally, if there's an issue and we want to fix it, how we would go about to address that. Obviously, that kind of, jumps a bit into the solution space. So at the beginning, I think it's better to kind of keep it general, explore, as I said, at a high level of how we could go about addressing that. But what we wouldn't like to do is kind of to be discussing the mechanics of each particular proposal without agreeing on what is the big picture and what we want to do in this space.
So, folks, there's plenty of seats over on this side if you don't want to stand up.
Yeah, so, if people want to stand, that's completely okay. Otherwise, there's a lot of empty chairs here. Okay, so with that, keeping in mind that those are the questions we want to have, keeping in mind that, that's the level of discussion we want to have, problem space instead of solution space, and, thinking in terms of there's an issue, yes or no, and do we want to solve it or is not really worthwhile. So we would like to basically open the mic for comments. And again, yeah, let me remind, I mean, let's keep this professional and let's try to be constructive. So we have two lines. I'll be doing the floor control. So Randy first, and then we will go here.
Could you pull up the first discussion slide?
Yeah.
So who are we worried about confusing? I hope it's not that group of people who understand all the fine points between an Apache 2, a GPL2, a Creative Commons, et cetera, license. If there's confusion, we usually just kind of document it. And I think there's documents describing those different categories. Isn't there?
Yeah. Yes.
And fairly simple ones.
Okay. If you guys can state your name, that would be great.
Did I do so? I'm sorry. Randy Bush, RJ, Arcus.
You introduced him.
No, I know I did, but I mean, we will reach a point where I don't know everyone on the mic, so that's much better. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Ted Lemon. So I was actually, when I first saw this slide, I thought that the question was, is there confusion about the RFC brand? But then as you were explaining the slide, it sounded like you were actually saying, is there confusion about what the issues are?
No, I mean, on the list, basically, some people were claiming that, people get confused because they don't understand that, for example, one RFC comes from the IETF,
Right,
and
yeah,
there
yeah.
could be RFCs, and I'm trying to summarize what people said on the list, right? So,
Right.
so this is like, is there an issue?
Okay.
So that's kind of what the slide wants to capture.
Right. So I guess the question that I would ask about this is not, is there confusion, but are there problems that the confusion has caused, and what are those problems?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ted. We go to the other mic.
Dan Bogdanovich. So you said, is there one or more issues? And I see some of the issues with the RFCs myself, but I would be really curious to see what other people have, what are their issues with the RFCs. So my main issue with the RFC brand is that we are trying to standardize code within the young models, and I think how we are doing it, that's a bad way to do it, and that's an issue in my opinion. But is it the issue for everybody else in this room? I don't know that. So having listed, some of the issues that people are raising would have been helpful, and then we would have known what more to discuss. Or we could say, oh, you have your issues, raise them, and let's have a discussion about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we are doing, and you can see on the list that, several people were basically bringing up issues, and we want to basically, refine our understanding of the issues and get your opinion.
And honestly, like when I put the words on the slide, I thought I would leave it open because you're going to interpret it one way, and whatever we say is not going to be right, and someone else is going to correct us. So we left it open on purpose a little bit so that you could get up and actually say what your issues are. So I did note them, and we can go from there.
Yeah, okay, so we should standardize, the code. That would be my issue with the RFCs.
Thank you.
Heather Flanagan, RFC Series Editor. So unfortunately, I think the way this BOF came about helped make the confusion that much more painful and worse for everybody involved. I think according to RFC 6635, it's my job to consider the evolution and strategy for the series, and this is absolutely not how I would have gone about doing that. What I would very much like to know from the community as to whether there is urgency to be solving this right now, and if there is, then I would like to actually have a much more structured and thoughtful approach, not too dissimilar from how I approach the format work. I can tell you that I have not heard anyone from the community say that this is causing a level of pain that has to be addressed right now. They weren't subtle when I first started and said, no, you're dealing with format, you're dealing with it right now. And I said, oh God, do I have to? Yes. Okay, I'm not getting that with this. So if that is the case, if the community does want this dealt with right now, then please give it to me so I can handle it. Thank you.
I think that's a great fair question, right? I mean, before talking about Before talking about the time plan, I would like to understand if there's an issue and if it's worth fixing. So, if we agree on that, I fully agree, we would need to understand the time plan and the urgency. So that's a very good point. Thanks. And to be clear, we are chairing this both. We are not the proponents or we are not deciding the process. So we are just trying to make kind of, use of our time as efficiently as possible. I think that's clear as well. So we are going to the other mic.
Lauren Kamari, Ops and Management AB. Can you please go back to one of the things that has a table?
The one that what is
either
allowed?
one.
We put the one that is allowed. Yeah, the one. No,
So, that shows that lots of people publish things that are RFCs. It also shows that some of them are informational, some of them are based current practice, some of them are proposed standards. That's interesting. There's no actual problem statement there, right? That's lots of people publish these things. What's the actual problem statement of what we think the issue is?
So the problem statement is not on the slide. You can check the proposal of the board. And basically, as I said, people have been talking about several issues. So that's the reason why we don't have a clear problem statement. And this is what we are trying to get at. So clearly, knowing the issues or what is the consensus around that, that would be actually what we need to do.
And so the other point is that this was some kind of level setting as well, because there are some people that are very steep in the RFC lore. There are others that are here that might not be. So this is really what some of this was about.
Just to start with, Heather, I don't think this is something that needs to be solved now, but for future evolution. I spend a lot of time in other SDOs and other industry consortia, and where I do see is people that do have a grasp of how RFCs are working, deliberately raising confusion about status of certain RFCs. And people coming in with individual or experimentals and raise the point that, yeah, but it's an RFC, so this is an IETF consensus product. And that's where I have a problem. And in that sense, in terms of this table, it's not as much of what the source of the RFC is, it's the document, that the fact that non-standards are labeled RFC, that is causing pain for me.
Okay. So just before you leave, so you would say that this issue you are facing, is it worth fixing or is it a small issue?
Long term, I would love to see it fixed, but I don't think there is I think this is a longer term process also with all the legacy already there that you have to retrofit. So going forward, I would love to see more distinction between the standards and everything else.
So it's an important issue, but not urgent.
It's an important, but it's not something we have to fix within, let's say, the next year.
Okay, thank you. Going to the next, yeah.
Jen Linkova, just a random internet citizen. I actually think that there is another problem, not about RFCs, but I have a data point. Recently, I am getting a lot of my friends who has very little idea about how IETF work, sending me links to various drafts which have not been adopted and sometimes expired, asking me, what are we smoking here? Because obviously it's not easy for people outside to see the difference between draft being just written by someone and which was not accepted very well at IETF and just expired, between draft adopted by working group and being in progress, and sometimes even between RFC. So I think we are not doing a really good job in making clear distinguish between what people should pay attention and what was just some ideas which are not going anywhere.
Again, the same question. I mean, this issue you are describing, do you think is worth?
Yes, because people are asking me like, is not 6 fair? And when I'm taking the questions, I'm like, where did you read about this?
Okay, thank you, thanks. Ted?
I'm pretty sure that Sue Harris was up before I was, so maybe you should.
I'm doing round robin, but.
Okay. So what I would really like to see, I don't think that this is tremendously urgent. I think that it's interesting. It's interesting to talk about. We talked about it on the IESG when I was on the IESG with you.
Yeah, sure.
And
Long time ago.
yeah, a long time ago. And so I've heard people talk about like, oh, somebody misrepresented an IETF thing or something as an IETF standards document that wasn't. What I'd really like to hear is somebody say, and this bad thing happened because of that. Because otherwise, like, yeah, okay.
That's exactly the is it worthwhile fixing
Yeah,
part of it.
and I guess the point I'm making here is that I have not yet heard anybody actually say something like that. That doesn't mean it's not the case, but I just haven't heard it said.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted.
Stuart Church at Apple. The slide you had when I stood up here was asking the first question, and my comment was, I think it's what in legal cases would be called leading the witness. The question was, is there some confusion or is there no confusion? And out of the 6 billion people on the planet, possibly one of them is at least a little confused. So it makes this, posing this as a binary question, I think is a bit misleading. Yes, there will always be confusion. Even among the standards track RFCs, some like DNS and DHCP are really widely used, and some of them flopped and are kind of irrelevant. And the stamp at the top of the RFC is not going to tell you that. The same is true of IEEE standards. Some are very successful and some are failures because frankly they don't work. And when they tried, they found it didn't work. And the fact that a committee agreed on it doesn't change the fact that it doesn't work. So when you're evaluating technology, you have to apply some critical thinking to deciding what's good and what's bad. And trying to have somebody else make a binary decision on that for you so you don't have to think about it, it is not going to work. I think if we do have this kind of differentiation that only standards are RFCs and other things are something else, we may get this unintended consequence that now there's a big push to get things published to standards that really shouldn't be because people want the RFC number. So I think we may regret the result if we do this.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Andrew.
Hi, my name is Andrew Sullivan. I don't have a strong feeling about whether there's one or more issue or whether it's worth solving. I have some personal views, but I don't think they really count very much. But I want to go back to something that Heather was saying about whether the community was pressing and saying this is really urgent or not. And that seems to me to boil down to a question of what the RFC series is for. So the format questions, the analogy with the format question is what got me up. The format questions, of course, are urgent for us because we're the people who are consuming that format, right? But we're the ones who have to live with the results and we're the ones who have to, plow through the ASCII art. But the question I think we need to be, or one of the questions that maybe we need to be asking is what the purpose of this RFC series is for. Because if the point of the series is to make this clearer to people who are confused about the difference between an internet draft describing IPv10 and a standard, or if the difference is, for people who are making, kind of governmental decisions and so on, and they need to know whether something's really a standard or not. If the purpose of this is for national consumption and maybe inclusion as possibly referenceable in a purchasing decision by a government, then actually the question, we're the wrong people to answer most of these questions because other people need to answer them, and I don't know what we want from this. So that seems to me to be something that maybe we could answer, and then we would be able to make some sort of progress forward. The one thing that I will say in response to something that Ted said is when I was IAB chair and I was dealing with a lot of outside people, there were discussions that I had that very definitely turned on the fact that there was this informational RFC that somebody was beating us with, or even better yet, I can recall a particular case where it was an historic RFC, and I had to spend like a good hour and a half explaining to somebody that historic at the top literally means that we decided it's obsolete. And they didn't care because it's an RFC and so it must be a standard. And so I have personally experienced some cases where there was harm. Now it was harm to me because it wasted my time. Maybe nobody else cares. But that was an example that I could think of. Thanks.
You may want to ask Rush at some point about implementing an April's Fool RFC. Anyway, so I think Andrew made a good point, which is that, and I mean, following up actually Randy's point before and Stuart, which is like, maybe here there's no confusion, what about out there? And I know some of you were actually reaching out to other communities, so I would expect people to go to the mic and explain what they figure out when talking to people outside here, because, obviously, probably, I would expect people in this room to understand what's the difference of all the streams. So I think that was a good point.
Phil Hornbaker. Well, as a process point, I would appreciate having somebody tell me what the problem is with precision before I'm told that it's not important. I've not been following any of this stuff. I've been coding for the past 2 months. So I've come to this cold, and I had no idea what anybody was talking about. And by the way, red herrings are called kippers. If you come to the UK, they're actually really tasty. Now, if you go back to the table, in particular, I'm concerned with, are we concerned with confusion between the rows or the columns? Now, as in terms of problems that are caused, there is a problem that is caused by a conflict between the assumptions of our process and the expectations of the external world. And I've hit it many times, because there is an assumption built into many IETF processes that document required or RFC required is a trivial bar. And there are other parts inside the IETF, in particular in the security area, where we do not want RFC numbers to go on certain things. We do not want, I do not like seeing an RFC number going on any cryptographic algorithm or an OID for an algorithm. I want to see that stop unless it is an algorithm that the IETF has specifically developed and reviewed thoroughly in CFRG, or something that has been through some analogous process. Because when people because we have a whole load of people who come to IETF with garbage crypto to get our imprimatur, and you can be sure that they're then selling that crypto as good crypto and saying that the IETF is backing it. So that is a concrete example where this confusion arises. So we need to think about this, and we need to clear that process backlog. And I don't know how to do it. I've got a few ideas about how we might do it, but that is a serious problem.
Okay, thank you. And to clarify once more, I mean, if we had had a problem statement, we would have put it there. I mean, we are working on understanding whether people agree or not there's a problem. So in that sense, that's what we are trying to figure out. And as I said, I understand people may be frustrated, but this is where we are in. So I don't think it would be fair for us to put a problem statement and just go there without discussing, what is the basically feeling in the room.
Mark Nottingham. I do think there's a problem here in that, as has been said a couple of times, people who aren't part of this process read our documents and they don't understand the context. And we look at that and say, well, it's obvious. You just go to this website and look up this status, or you look at this boilerplate and you can tell that this means that, and we have the history. They don't.
And we have the cursive knowledge, and they have that. I think that's worth improving, because I think as an organization, we are still quite opaque. We are still quite unfriendly to newcomers, and we do everyone, including ourselves, a disservice when we perpetuate that. Is that an urgent?
I'd like to treat it as something we're just continuously looking at. I think that making drastic changes, such as have been discussed, are probably not a great solution, especially after listening to the discussion here. But, and I'm very sympathetic to what Heather was saying. You brought up the document format change. And to me, that's incredibly interesting, because I think it's very human to look at the front page of the RFC and let your eyes glaze over it and go to the stuff you want to find. Everyone just goes and looks at the paragraph or the example they're looking for, usually example, and they ignore all the rest of the crap. We're doing the document format work now. When I look at an RFC, I know if it's an RFC, even if whom over there is holding it, because I know the shape of the document. Just like a Wikipedia page, just like a business letter, just like an academic paper. Since we're going to a more flexible format, one of the things we could do is say, well, maybe there's a different format for a standards tracker RFC versus an internet draft, or versus an IAB document, and be a little more subtle than using a big sledgehammer. That's the kind of discussion I think we should be having.
Thank you. You have a mic?
Sue Harris, independent for this moment.
sets. So what I'm confused with is the purpose of the BOF. If you felt that, I think Heather's done a good job of listening to things as her people are trying to give her some sanity checks. She's done pretty good. If you're saying the BOF is because she's not listening, okay. If you're just saying this was a chance to get community input, okay. But there's a lot of confusion that originates from the way this whole process hit up. So I'm even more confused than the questions. I see many things that we need to do, but I'm confused why, Heather's gone through a lot of this, why you didn't have her stand up and talk about some of these issues and some of the current standard stuff if you're going to do it. Give me more meat on the bones to make some substantial comments about what the problem is. It's just not normal for a BOF, guys, to have so little meat on the bones.
Yeah. As Ted pointed out before, it's been a long while since I left the IED and the IST, so I don't approve or reject BOF. So we are not part of that process, actually. So we were there, now here.
Hi, Christopher. I just wanted to make two quick comments. First, on the element of confusion. Yes, from my personal experience, there is much confusion. I speak to many people who have, similar opinions that Jen's colleagues, friends happen to have, that they equate individual drafts with RFCs with basically everything that comes out of the IETF is the same, and they consider everything that goes into the IETF a good idea, and I think we all know that's not the case all the time. And whether or not there's a problem, this particular standard is a problem, yes, I would also claim it is a problem. Particularly, not all RFCs are created equal. And we all know that, but like I said, many people I talk to just assume that because it has an RFC, we should treat it the same way, be it informational standards or anything. And they let that influence like designs and software and things like that, which is not good. And to Stuart's point, yes, I would expect individuals to sort of read the material and kind of understand and, figure out what's going on and make an educated and informed decision based on that. But oftentimes I encounter people that just, see an RFC, think it's great, and then want to ship it. And I would like to do something to correct that particular problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Ron Bonica, Juniper Networks. Listening to the conversation, I hear that we don't have a clear, crisp description of the problem we're trying to solve. We don't know, well, if we did know what the problem is, we wouldn't know how severe it is. And we don't have any proposals on the table to solve the problem, obviously, because we don't know what the problem is. Given that, I think about what the entrance criteria are for a BOF. And, as much as I like being in a room with a couple hundred of my closest friends, I wonder if we're going to come out with anything today. Maybe a good thing to do would be to go back and define the problem and try again. Given that, I think Mark Nottingham might have had a good first shot at defining the problem, but in a room with 150, 200 people, I doubt if we're going to get there.
Rich Sauls, so speaking from my OpenSSL experience, yes, there's a problem, and yeah, I'd like to see it solved sooner rather than later. Back in December, the OpenSSL team got together and we said, okay, we're going to have a nice bright line for deciding what kinds of crypto we're going to implement and what not. And we said the bright line will be IETF standard. That didn't help us at all. All right, we have people who spent significant time and effort implementing JPEG because it's a standard. Well, it's actually not. We had to point out, no, it's an individual, and it comes from the CFRG, but, it's published by the IETF. And so there's also an opportunity cost. And I also see it not just in terms of people wasting time doing things that aren't really core and useful to the whole internet. There's also customers coming in and saying, well, I want this thing. I saw that more at a previous employer than Akamai. But yes, it's a problem. It's something that should be addressed. If it's in the editor's remit to do that, awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Lucy Lynch, Minister without portfolio. I'm going to read something, and then I want to follow up on something that Andrew said. The content of an NWG note may be any thought, suggestion, etc., related to the host software or any other aspect of the network. Notes are encouraged to be timely rather than polished. Philosophical positions without examples or other specific suggestions or implementation techniques without introductory or background explanation, and explicit questions without any attempted answers are all acceptable. The minimum length for an NWG note is 1 sentence. These standards, or lack thereof, are stated explicitly for 2 reasons. First, this is the important part, there is a tendency to view a written statement as ipso facto authoritative, and we hope to promote the exchange and discussion of considerably less than authoritative ideas. Second, there is a natural hesitation to publish something unpolished, and we hope to ease this inhibition. It's really important to remember that all of our documents, anywhere in the series, not just IETF documents, because the series is not just IETF documents, are as much about our internal process and our conversation and our ability to iterate and advance as they are about the external brand and how the end product is used. Where I think there's confusion is that not all internet standards are RFCs and not all RFCs are internet standards. So for the IETF, if you're asserting an IETF document as an IETF standard, you have a branding problem, which is separate from the RFC series having a branding problem.
So looking at the length of the queues, if you can keep it to like 2-3 minutes, that would be perfect. So I'm saying that judging by the length of the queues, let's try to keep it concise, like 2-3 minutes, per comment, that would be perfect.
So I like to operate from data. So could I have a show of hands of people in the room here who have been to fewer than 10 IETF meetings? Okay, great. You guys can stay. So, right, in order for our documents, anything we write here to be effective, this group isn't going to make that happen. It needs to be taken up and understood and put in context by a whole big community of developers and users. And among that community, in all of the conversations I've had, there's a tremendous deal of confusion. Not just confusion in the universe, in the abstract, confusion among populations of people for which getting a clear message here matters. When I ask people about what they think the RFC series is, there's almost universal surprise. One, about the fact that RF's requests for comments are universal and immutable and unchangeable. I think that's water under the bridge. We can live with that. But the other thing that people are always surprised by is that there's not a single consistent process by which these things are produced. The IETF is not the owner of that process. People think in my my anecdata is that's the case. So my experience, as several other people have said, is that there is confusion, and it's confusion in communities that matter for the efficacy of our work in affecting the internet. Now, is that harmful? Is there a concrete point of harm I can point to? I think for the there's some anecdotes you'll hear about that, but I think for the most part, it's not going to be this network failed or this project failed or this concrete bad thing happened because of a specific point of confusion. I view this more of Rome taking 500 years to fall. Right? We've all had our worries about the relevance of the IETF to the internet, and this is a contributing factor in that in that friction between our community here and the internet community writ large. So given that kind of gradual grinding, paper cut sort of problem we have, and given that our experience with things like the RFC format is that it takes multiple years to make any change here, maybe it's not urgent like it needs to be fixed this week, but proceeding with all deliberate haste seems like something that we should keep in mind for the continued health of the organization and our continued ability to have impact on the internet and to make the internet better.
So Dave Senecope, in the interest of brevity, I'll just add my support to those that have made comments regarding that there's confusion to the external community, the other SDOs.
You know, all they have a view, all RFCs are created equal, and we have to explain to them that some are more equal than others, right? Timing wise, this doesn't need to be solved tomorrow. It didn't get caused in one day. It's not going to get solved in one day. And as far as harm goes, it's the time and effort that it takes to explain that all RFCs are not created equal that's the harm. It's an onerous effort. It takes a tremendous amount of time and therefore money. To what Lucy just read, if we could somehow externalize that to make that educational material for the external folks that consume the RFCs, that's at least a step forward. Because right now, they have no idea that exists.
Thank you.
Barbara Stark. So first, I want to just completely agree with what Stuart Cheshire said long ago. So I'll try not to repeat any of that. But so as someone who is an employee of an evil ISP and therefore a large consumer of RFCs, I totally see this confusion all the time that people are talking about. But I am totally unconvinced that adding semantics to the ID is going to solve the confusion that people see out there in the world. It's sort of like trying to add semantics to the IPv6 address, thinking that somehow that will reduce, I don't know, solve somebody's problems. I don't think that adding semantics there is a solution, and here's why I don't think it's a solution. The confusion is brought about by the fact that there are some proposed standards that are not worth the paper it would take to print them. There are some informational RFCs that I personally widely demand vendors implement because they are worth a whole lot more than some of the proposed standards. And the reason one became a proposed standard and one didn't is because of consensus, which didn't involve necessarily the consensus of the community that would eventually use it. So you have that. The other reason I don't think that adding the semantics will work is because I see that there's even confusion among drafts. I see people pointing to drafts as, here's what the IETF says. And not only do they point to drafts that have IETF in the draft title, they point to drafts that do not have IETF in the title. So if you're going to try to solve the confusion, it's not going to happen, and I think the draft stuff is just a case in point. And I think really education is the way to go, and I'd really recommend making any changes by adding semantics.
Thank you. Randy.
Randy Bush from Too Many Places. I think the root problem is not this at all. It's quality. It's the quality of the stuff, not the font. Okay? Richard, if only the Vatican could print books, yes, everything would be very clear. I don't think we want to live in that world. Okay? If we could fix stupidity, I would actually advocate this meeting be in the United States, in fact, in Washington, D.C.
I think you mean Helsinki.
Exactly. Well, Yari, you people are more foolish than I thought. And you know, lastly, it is 3 months and a day since Bob Braden died. Aren't we embarrassed?
Hi, I'm Ted Hardy, not the previously speaking Ted Lemon, but a different Ted. I'm here to point out 2 things and to make 1 claim. First, a number of people have looked at the back matter for this BOF and somehow missed that one of the back pieces of back matter was an RFC published something like 23 years ago now, which described a portion of this problem. And so the question of is this urgent or not is definitely been answered, because it clearly is not. It came back to the fore to some degree with Christian returning to the IB and going, 20 years ago I left you this problem. Why haven't you fixed it since then? And I think that clearly answers that. Is this something that has to be answered today? No. This isn't something that we've lived with for a very long time. I think the second thing I wanted to point out is that there is, in fact, more than one stream trying to speak here, and we've made several evolutions since the text that Lucy read out so feelingly. The first of which was we had an editor, John Postel, who maintained a series with a very particular quality and voice that has changed over time as Joyce, as Bob, as Heather, as even our beloved Ars Olaf have had roles in that. We have had that evolution, and one of those pieces of evolution was that we've moved to something where there are now very distinguished streams within the RFC series. And I spoke on the mailing list about that being a conversation and trying to maintain it as a conversation and asking whether or not we in fact needed them to be in a single series for that conversation to be present or not. And I want to point out that if we need that, we're actually doing something to forbid the evolution of each individual stream in different directions. There's an idea in evolutionary biology called adaptive radiation, where you occupy different niches and develop new techniques to meet those niches. As it is now, in order to maintain that conversation, we're keeping everybody from doing that adaptive radiation. And I think the question that I want the group to think about as we go forward is that the right engineering balance for the different communities that read these different streams? Whether it's a single community, I think it's actually more than one. And given that we actually now have the opportunity to do lots of publication that can comment on RFCs in many different ways that don't need to be within the series, are we missing something by missing that evolution? And I think that's a question that's worth asking.
Thank you, Ted. At this point, I ask again people to be concise, and I would like to close the lines. So if you really had an important comment, please go, but then after that, I'm closing the lines.
Okay, Mary Barnes. I can definitely tell you there is absolute confusion about, standards track versus informational. Every single RFP I have responded to in the past 20 years has informational documents. Are you compliant to it? It really, really bothered me at first, and I tried to explain to the sales guys and all that. But, they didn't like it when I put all that text in there about that. And you know what? In 20 years, nothing's broken. We've not had a customer come and complain, right? Show me how you've implemented this sort of thing, right? So I don't think we have a real problem to solve. And when someone comes up and finds an individual draft, and they do sometimes show up in RFPs, to me, that's an opportunity for dialogue. Okay, why do you want this? And, open discussion about it. But I don't think there's a real problem to solve, at least in my experience in 20 years.
Thank you, Mary.
Tolles Eckert, just speaking for myself, not for my employer. A, good luck if you change anything. B, if you change anything, please very carefully look at the current default IPR disclosures. Try to figure out which actual type of stream they apply to, and try to make sure that any change we're doing on the whole system is accompanied by modification to the IPR disclosure that will rather make it easier to get IPR disclosures clearly for more streams than we have right now, and not less, right? Because right now there's a good likelihood in court that you could basically get the IPR disclosure applicable to informational, maybe not even some of the disclosures to any IETF, but also individual stream, right? So let's make sure that we rather get, more IPR disclosures than less if we're going to tackle this issue.
Thank you. Rush.
Russ Housley. So there is confusion, but I'd like to try and measure the level of it a little bit. When I was IETF chair, we had a meeting with the ITU leadership, and they were very confused about which of the RFCs it was appropriate to have one of their standards reference. We sat down, explained it in less than half an hour, wrote some text, they put it in their policies and procedures, and it hasn't been revisited for 10 years. It's working. I think that kind of education can happen to reduce the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, I think I was in that meeting actually. Yeah, and Sean was as well.
Okay, please.
Mia Kulevin. So I think there's no doubt that there's confusion. The question is, should we address this confusion? Maybe, would be nice. Can we address the confusion? I'm less sure. I don't know what the answer is. But the thing that really bugs me and the problem I would like to see solved is that people actually utilize this confusion to just get an RFC number, like no matter what, they just want to cross somewhere in this table, right? And then they misuse this confusion to like pretend the idea to be something that it's not. I don't think that's acceptable for us as a community, that we know this behavior exists and we just don't do anything against it. That's a problem I would like to be solved.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm definitely closing the lines after Bob and Eric. Yari.
Yari Arco. So my personal opinion is that we actually do have multiple problems, in the different parts of the RFC system and for different uses or for different streams. I think we have an issue with sort of the more dynamic GitHub style working and how that fits the RFC model. And on some part of the community, we have some question about the confusion around what does this RFC actually stand for. I've certainly personally witnessed that a number of times. We have an ongoing discussion about how well the RFC series fits the purposes of the IRTF, and then maybe other issues. Now, the question, of course, is how serious are these problems and can they be fixed? As Miria asked also, my personal opinion has varied over the years. At least certainly right now, I'm not losing sleep over at least the confusion thing, but I do perceive it as a problem. And the other thing I want to say is that it is important that, like for a living series or living system, we actually consider some of these issues that we might actually have to discuss in the community and otherwise to look at if we have problems, and then if we do have problems, then we go and fix them in some fashion. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Yari.
Martin Thompson. So I think Andrew asked the question that I'd like to get up and ask, and I think this probably is a concession to Heather in that we're talking about the wrong thing and we started in the wrong frame for all of this. I've come to the realization after having this discussion that there are some fundamental problems here. And I think to a large extent, the problems that we're seeing are as a result of the evolution of the series and the evolution of the streams over time. So I was tooling around in here and I was looking at the standard markers, and I discovered standard 25. If anyone wants to go and look that one up, it's RFC 867. It's awful. It's absolutely horrific, but we keep it in the standard series anyway. And so what was considered good and useful and valuable in 1983 is very different to what we use the series for today. And to Ted's point, that is reflected in a little bit of tension between the different uses for the streams, and often even potentially within the streams for the IETF stream with the diverse uses that it has, there may be some tension there between what we use for experimental and the processes that we apply for those versus those that we put on standards track. I'm less concerned about the tension there. The problems that I'm seeing in this room extend further than that, because the people clapping in response to the comments at the mic show that there's a fairly fundamental rift in the opinions of those people in the room. And I would like to remind everyone that we're all here for the same reason, and that is to make the internet better. And on that scale, none of this really matters that much.
Okay. Yeah, that point was made several times on the list. I think that's important. Colin.
So Colin Jags. I'm going to speak to, I think there is a problem, but I'd like to start with why I think it's important is I think our RFC brand is the most valuable thing IETF actually has. when you go to developers that aren't deep in internet technology, the type of people in this room, and you say, hey, can you implement RFCX for you? The general assumption is, it's probably good. It's RFCX. It's probably worth, well thought out, and worth doing. And that's a very valuable thing. So that is why people work so hard to occasionally get an RFC number for something that has not really had very wide review, and then they go and represent it as having wide review and wide consensus. And we've all seen this with governments, with vendors, and things. And multiple people have stood up at this mic and said, hey, that's not a real big deal. You spend some time with them and educate them. That is a little bit true, but I don't think that's the cost. The real cost is the ones we never get to explain to because they never come to us. They go with this technology and the people who are misrepresenting it without understanding the broader context. That's the real cost of this problem. So on the urgent point of view, I mean, obviously it's been around. We've been bleeding for 25 years. And we should either just accept we're going to keep bleeding forever, or we should urgently try and solve this problem. But what we should not do is just continue boiling frogs, right? That one way or the other, I don't really care which, but I think it's actually the fact you've been bleeding on something for 20 years might mean it's more urgent to deal with than, yeah, let's do it for another 10 years.
Thank you, Colin. Georg.
Yeah, my name is Georg Meyer. I'm with 3GPP. We have something like I think some people in this room are striving for. So we have a clear distinction between normative, like real standards, and informative, like something like your best current practice or studies. And this is nice to have, but the problems that you're raising, they also happen in our standards body. So people putting just TR, which is an informative paper, on slides and saying, this is now done by 3GPP. Well, this is just a study. This might die. This includes several solutions. Maybe the person shows you only one solution. So there is no clarity, or there is from the outside world, let's say that way. They still need to come back to us, look into our specifications. They need to be willing to learn and to understand what we are doing. And usually when things are put on a slide or in some general paper, these things are not discussed, and these things, unfortunately, are not understood, right? So whether you call it differently or not, people usually don't see the difference. On the other hand, we are referencing a lot of your documents, and obviously, we have a lot of discussions about drafts. So it took us a while to fully understand what the different types of drafts mean and what the different stages are. But nowadays we have a good understanding, and it's a learning process. And it also means that those people who are interested in drafts come here and learn from you. So I think this is also a mechanism to attract people here. So I don't really know if such an effort that you're planning is worthwhile doing. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It would be interesting to ask in this room who knows the difference between a TR and a TS, and yeah. But for another day, maybe.
Kathleen Moriarty. So I work for a large company, and I have not run into these problems. I reached out to some developers, and they don't have confusion. But if we go back about 5 years ago, we did have some problems with several SEOs. I had separate meetings with the ITU and also ones with NIST, and we had plenary lines. I know Sean stood up too, and I stood up at that plenary line talking about standards track documents, and why don't we put an effort towards making documents standards track? And that would have gone a long way at that time for that problem. So is that part of this problem too? And I suspect yes. And the other thing, I think Heather made a really good point in the beginning. Let's see what she could come up with, because some of this might be user interface display things that could easily be solved. But I think that standards track and us making an concerted effort to, push documents to standards, internet standard, would be important and helpful.
Thank you.
Aaron Falk. So I hear two kinds of problems being discussed. One is intentional process abuse, people getting RFCs to masquerade as something that they're not. I haven't heard compelling evidence that it exists in a way that we should be concerned about, but I'm open to that. I think the actual much bigger problem is what Barbara and Randy were talking about, which is, our technology is hard to understand. We produce documents in a very fragmented way that is driven more by the engineering process than by trying to make the design that we're describing easily consumable by the people who need to understand it and support it. It needs an editor, really. Like capital E editor, right? And we've talked about this before, right? New Track was a whole activity to talk about how can we put a layer on top of our standards to make it easier to understand what the IETF recommendations are. And we decided that was too hard. But I think changing the identifiers of the documents is trying to treat a minor symptom of what is actually a much more deep and harder to solve problem. But I think that it would actually be a huge benefit to the internet and the IETF to try to address that. But it's going to be a lot of work by a lot of people. But I think it would be helpful. I had a third point, but I forgot it, so I'm just happy.
So you get credit if you want to go back to the line. We will accept that. Next one.
Keith Moore. I try to get points and bullets here to make it quick. So yes, there's confusion. I am easily persuaded that there is some confusion out there. I don't think it really needs a lot of debate. We can all cite some examples. However, that doesn't mean that some unspecified change is going to make things less confusing. It could easily be worse. Some confusion is inevitable because people's attention is in short supply, and it takes time to understand this stuff, not just the technical stuff, but the politics. So there is a limited ability to improve things. But it doesn't mean, it might be that some effort is worthwhile. That's fine. We shouldn't get all freaked out about it. It should be part of our ongoing process just to think, how do we make stuff, how do we address the public's confusion about it as an ongoing effort? I don't know, maybe some of you can cite examples, but I can't think of a single technical specification series that I can look at it and immediately tell whether this is relevant or high quality. If somebody has one, I'd like to know about it. In my opinion, the biggest problem in IETF is not independent stream submissions. It is working group output. Because time and time again, and for the last 20 years, I have seen working group after working group after working group make fundamental decisions based on hums in a room from people buried with their heads in laptops or staring with, PowerPoint on a screen that doesn't really address what the issues are. And a lot of the fundamental decisions get made like that because people sort of expect that once a working group takes on some body of work, that it's going to result in a publication. Doesn't always happen, probably happens too often. And I've seen too many cases where the best review that happens to a working group's output happens after a working group last call. Okay, and often by the IESG. I think we've got some fundamental problems with our process, and if we want our documents to be more reliably relevant, we have to look at ourselves. And we have to look at our own processes and how do we produce better quality documents that are more relevant. And I'll tell you something, it doesn't mean ignoring tussles and hoping that the problem will go away and just split every problem to the point that those tussles are not obvious. One other point I think is that there really might be some value in us not taking ourselves too seriously, because then we'll understand that we have to win people's use of our products by making our work relevant, not by what name we stamp on it.
Thank you, Keith. John.
John Clenson. Thank you, Keith. You made what I had to say a lot shorter. It seems to me we've got several kinds of confusion. We've got confusion which is deliberately induced. And induced most effectively in those who are gullible, and I don't think we know how to fix that. We've also got confusion between documents of high quality and documents of low quality. Unfortunately, that's independent of stream. We've got high quality independent submission documents and low quality independent submission documents. We've got high quality ISG, IETF documents and some really abysmal quality IETF documents. Fixing that would certainly be worthwhile. Maybe we need to reconsider giving the RFC editor the power back to say, no, this just doesn't work as acceptable quality for the series, regardless of its technical content, if we want to solve that problem. As was pointed out about 3GPP, and as Martin Durst pointed out on the list, almost every standards body has confusion among its various kinds of documents. ISO used to have and may still have a class of technical reports which were known internally as substandards. But externally, they were type 3 technical reports, and nobody knew the difference unless they took the trouble to understand and read introductions and pay attention to careful attention to what was normative and what was not normative. These problems are no more serious than ours, but they are no less serious either. It seems to me that the other issue here, which has not been mentioned, is the RFC series, including the quotation from RFC 3 that Lucy read, started out in a way which is part of the defining characteristic of the IETF, which is that we are an engineering body which also produces standards. And as an engineering body, we are and need to be very sensitive to the fact that we are not omniscient, that everything we write is not going to turn out to be either useful or in the long run even true, and that critiques and evaluations of our own work are very important to that engineering process. And to blow any of that away on the theory that we ought to control streams differently, or that some document categories are more valuable or more important by virtue of where they came from than other document categories, moves us closer to the mode of standards bodies that the IETF has spent years and years criticizing, sometimes in very aggressive language. So that major observation is be careful what you wish for. And finally, I cannot reinforce strongly enough the notion that we've got an RFC series editor who's got particular expertise, who in those areas of expertise is, to put it mildly, well above the average of the IETF or the people in this room. And if we think we have a problem, then we should be handing our description of the problem, I don't think we have one yet, to Heather and asking for recommendations and taking those very seriously. And if we're not willing to do that, we've got much more serious problems than confusion about the RFC series.
Thank you, John. So if you haven't signed the blue sheets, please raise your hands and Andrew will fix that. Andrew?
Okay, so Philhan Baker. So I'd like to build upon the proposal made by Mark Nottingham and incorporate his comments by reference in my own as if set out at seriatim. I think that there is an issue here in that, as Lucy pointed out, RFC, as we use them today, are not what they were intended to be. That's okay because they are something different but something useful. They're not really requests for comments, they're really requests for consideration. We have a work product and we're asking the rest of the world to consider that work product. And that is good and special. But there's also these other things that people try and inject. And we do actually have a safety valve that was originally introduced to recapture RFC, which is internet drafts. Now, there was a point when an internet draft would expire after 6 months, and then some of us who do patent work pointed out, hey, you're destroying all our prior art, and so now they don't expire. I would like to propose that you can take an internet draft and turn it into an internet proposal or an internet something. And all it means is that that name is now fixed in and it's never going to change. Now, what does that do for us? Well, all those people who all they need to do is to get a fixed document, to get a code point assignment, IANA registry, whatever, they've now got a series which is just for that. Now, the objection that I would then hear was, oh, well, now the whole world is going to come and demand things from the IETF, and they're going to get these. Well, that's success. Because one of my concerns here is that the IETF has lost traction with,
The internet development community is no longer 2,000 people who come to IETF. It's now more like 1 million people. And, in my field, the programmatic signal, there's about 6 different groups who are developing their own protocols for doing instant messaging that's encrypted. Wouldn't it be really nice if they just could dump out their protocols with no review at all and just get them into a static archive in one place? And then when we, even if nothing ever happens to them, and it won't for most of them, at least then you've got a fixed point that you can reference and you can work on. And so that would be something that I propose as, think in terms of reforming the Internet Draft Series rather than the RFC series, and that might also offload some of the pressure on IETF process because there'll be less need to put the crap through.
Okay, thank you. I want to remind people to be concise. We don't have much time, please.
David, and I just would like to provide some personal observations. The first one is that today we are talking about the confusions, they're confusion or not. But I really want to ask one question is that is IETF is ready to make itself understood from more people? I propose this question because still today, the April Fool's document is still published. And there is a case that the IPv6 and IPv9 fight still continued in China. So I provide my observation here. So I'm not, when I first come to IETF, I don't think it's very serious because they published that joke document. So if IETF want more people to understand its process, its document, I think it should be find a way to first things to cut off the April 1st jokes document. That's my one observation. Second one is that when I first entered one field, for example, the DNS field, I found it's very hard to find an entry. I compare with the IEEE standard. If the IETF a thing standard body like the IEEE, they can be some structured, some directory structured way for newcomers to reduce the learning curve so that people can be more easy to follow the thread, mainstream thread, and to grab the standard series. So that I think that's the second observation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Warren.
Warren Kamari, would you mind quickly flipping to the draft thing that shows how many documents are informational, proposed standard, etc.? So, okay,
This
yeah,
one.
that's it. So one of the things that I've heard people saying is that people get confused between proposed standards and informational and BCP, and oh my God, that's a problem.
I get confused by this color scheme.
Pardon?
I get confused by this color scheme.
Sure, okay. So, I mean, I should point out that if you add up informational and BCP and some of the others, experimental, that gets to close to 40% of our documents. A lot of the stuff that the ops area publishes is informational. Saying things on RFCs very much makes them second-class citizens. And, that's kind of annoying to 40% of our documents. But okay, people are entitled to that opinion. I should point out also the IETF policy on wiretapping. That was an informational IAB document. I guess that can't be a standard anymore. Pervasive monitoring is an attack. I kind of thought that was useful. BCP, sorry, can't be an RFC. There's also 1984. That also, BCP, nope, sorry, no RFC for you. This seems unreasonable to me.
Thank you. So if you haven't signed the blue sheets, please do it now. Otherwise,
I'll do it after I'm done bloviating. Sorry, I don't always agree with PHP, but when I do, it's like at the mic. I think that publishing has changed, and there was a time when it really made sense and was imperative to have one publication that you could sign on to if you want to be part of the conversation. But in that time, things have changed, and now that's not true. And it's not true in a really important way, which is say that these documents that we so proudly spit out in 72-column ASCII are not the entire conversation. And like a huge amount of that conversation is happening other places on, Twitter, it's happening on GitHub, it's happening on, on screens on people's blogs, on Medium. So like we're already past the point where the conversation is only on our series. Now, does that mean we have to like split the series up? No, it does not. But it means that that's no longer like the way things play out. And as PHP was saying, different things require different levels of treatment and different levels of behavior. And there are things that like make sense to be like immutable documents, and things that don't make sense to be immutable documents, and things that make sense to have like high bars for approval, and things that make sense to have low bars for approval. And so as a process requirement, like we need to support those kinds of things if we want to like be sensible people and like make the world work. And like we see this a lot. We see for code point assignments, where actually it's like really important to have some like way to like stuff the document somewhere so that people can see what the code point means. But like it doesn't need to be like it may need to be immutable in some sense if people like find it, but it doesn't need to be like go through any actual approval. So to essentially put, so like is there confusion? I think we've heard some stuff people say there is. I tend to believe the same thing. Is it urgent? I don't know. But I guess to essentially which I hear some people, I think sometimes I feel like people like they're gonna like if we do any kind of segmentation that cuts people out of the conversation. And I think that may have been true like at one point, but I just think it isn't true now. So if that's people's concern, I guess I'm less concerned about that.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Early Atlas. So 3 to 4 things. First, we have spent, since the internet started, putting out standards as RFC. If people haven't gotten the idea this is where our standards are by now, and that not all of them are standards, how long do we think an education process would take in order to get them to understand a change? We have invested in the RFC as a brand. It is what people understand our standards come out as. If folks are concerned that there are some RFCs that should be more important, that's what we have internet standards for. It'd be lovely to see people motivated to work on progressing documents. I hear the point. Not all RFCs have the relevancy when you start, that the history of it changes over time, the usefulness of it changes over time. We've talked about tagging, we've talked about having essentially a dashboard equivalent to give context around RFCs. There are many things we can do. But throwing away the brand, which everyone understands, this is where standards come from, is fascinating. The next piece, as Warren already pointed out, informational RFCs matter. BCPs matter. The fact that I don't have to go out and write code doesn't mean the architecture for how to use it doesn't matter. That's why they're RFCs. And yes, I know there's a lot of bad RFCs. I've read them. But that's not the point. The point is, this is not something where you can separate it out and say, these are the ones I care about. Because trust me, the ones I care about, very different from the ones some other people care about. The fourth point, Heather has already taken steps as the RFC editor with the new format where it's going to be even clearer. I know we can't do flashing, but everything short of flashing we're doing to clarify already what there is. And Heather and the RFC editor, the oversight board have spent a lot of time thinking and hearing about what these things are. I haven't heard a concrete proposal. I haven't heard why they were not adequately involved in the process and discussion that led up to this BOF. I haven't seen a draft to read about it. Given that this is not an earth-shattering problem, I am stunned at the decision that following normal process, including people who are passionate, have been thinking about this and are experts in the field, was not followed. And that makes me sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Hi, Bob Hinden. Sort of 3 points. I think a lot of it's been said. The RFC is a great brand. Everyone wants to use it, apparently. So this is a nice problem to have. and we really should be really careful to not break it, because when you break brands, you can't ever get them back. And so some of the proposals that were made, I think, would be negative. I sort of view the IETF community should be thinking about making its tent bigger, not making it smaller, not keeping people out, valuing people who have been here for more than 10 meetings, et cetera, et cetera. We want to make this bigger. We talk about not having enough external support. We're not going to get more support if we make it harder, if we make the tent smaller. I'm not convinced. Yes, there is a lot of confusion about this, for sure, but I don't think it's fixable. There's a lot of history, and any solution may be worse than the problem. We can't make the world perfect. Right? Spending a lot of cycles on trying to get perfection, so no one in the world is confused, let alone the ones who actually have to look at this stuff. And I get confused reading a lot of RFCs too. I think that it all seems like sort of a fool's errand to me. And lastly, we have a structure for working on the evolution of the RFC series, and it's called the RFC editor. It's defined in an RFC, in fact. And if we want issues like this to be worked on, we should ask the RFC editor to go work on them and then do a thorough analysis and come back and make some recommendations. We can decide whether we want to do them or not. But that's how I think this should be done in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So at this point, we heard kind of useful feedback, I think, and thanks everyone for being concise and to the point. At this point, before we wrap up, I would like to give Heather the possibility to come to the mic and say, you got good feedback. Is there anything you would like us to ask, or?
Gonzalo, I'm going to get even with you for this. So, is it not still on? Okay. I love the mic. The mic loves me. So what I'm hearing from all of this is it super urgent? No. Does it need to be addressed? Yes. Does it actually change anything that I had already been planning and starting to socialize and talk to people about? No, actually it doesn't. I do think I'll bump up in urgency putting together the kind of outline of what problems, plural, do we have, what tools do we have to solve them. I'm also very inclined to reach out to other communities that I work with, the archive community, the library community, the publisher community, work with the Internet Society and marketing and branding people, folks that have expertise in that space, and say, you guys know actually more about this than I do. How do you measure this kind of thing? How do you actually evolve a brand while still retaining the core importance? I would like to talk to the IETF a little bit to make sure that we're all still on the same page with why the RFC series exists. It's a publication mechanism. It's also an archival mechanism. Is that still important to you? It's very important to me. But that seems to be a point that's being lost quite a bit. So there's work here to be done. I think we all know that. The plans I have to make it happen haven't really changed, though I may bump them up in urgency. And if anyone has other thoughts or concerns or questions or ideas or people that they would like me to talk to, let me know, because I'm always open to that.
Thank you. So I think with this, I think this was useful to brainstorm. We heard several opinions. I think that was a first summary of what I heard as well. So I think we have next steps. Well, I think it doesn't make any sense to take any harm because, I think it would be counterproductive at least.
We can have a home to not have a home.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, so I think from yeah, exactly. No, I don't want to get there. So from our side, basically, I mean, this is kind of the end of the session. But before, I mean, the sponsoring ID. I mean, do you want us to do anything before we wrap up? We're good. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. As I said, we have next steps, and well, the meeting is adjourned.
I'll just point out that RFC++ means increment the value of RFC by 1 and use the old value.